Wired into technology transformation, this is the Digital Bulletin podcast.
How's it going, listener? Thank you for jumping aboard for our first podcast of this year, and indeed this decade. Some things never change, however, and there's a familiar feel to our panel as we welcome Digital Bulletin Content Director James Henderson.
Hello.
And Chief Executive Officer Romilly Broad.
Hello.
Chaps, how has 2020 treated you so far? It's the middle of January already.
Yeah, it feels like we're already halfway through the year. So it just doesn't stop, actually, does it? Because you go away and you put your feet up for what feels like 5 minutes, and then it's CES. And so it's just insane. It just doesn't stop, which is good. We like that, don't we? But
there's always that thing, isn't there, when you have a break where in the back of your mind you know that when you come back it's going to be mad.
Yeah, mad in a good way so far. Fingers crossed it carries on.
Yeah, I mean, the nature of what we do with the publishing element as well, it means that we would usually have a sort of 30-day publishing cycle, and it's nearer 20, which is exactly what we did in December as well. So, the fun never stops.
Now, coming up on today's episode, we discuss industry's demand for data literacy and the role technology plays for creative agency Spark 44. But first, some news. So exactly how has the world of business technology welcomed in the new year? We've already had the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, which is where Samsung birthed a fully artificial human. In reality, this was the company's AI-based avatar creation software, which has been in the works for a while. Pranav Mistry, CEO of Samsung Star Labs, spoke with the humanoid on stage at CES, but the reception wasn't all positive, with some criticising the somewhat stunted interaction. While we're on the topic of AI, the Trump administration has wasted little time in laying down new boundaries around the use of artificial intelligence. An executive order has given federal agencies 180 days to build a regulatory framework around AI, while the government is also stamping down on AI exports. More recently, another acquisition grabbed people's attention, with Visa paying over $5 billion for fintech startup Plaid, while research from Goldman Sachs suggests Azure might just be edging AWS in the cloud wars. If not in revenue, then certainly in service delivery. Now, you can find a comprehensive roundup of the reporting on these stories and many, many more via the Bulletin on digitalbullet.in. But next, we're going to explore one headline news item in more detail, and it's all about self-driving vehicles. Qualcomm is well known as a leader in mobile and telecoms technology, but despite having a proven track record in the automotive industry, it has kept its work on autonomous cars tightly under wraps, up to now. At the beginning of January, it unveiled Snapdragon Ride, a version of its Snapdragon chip, purpose-built to power all levels of automated driving. The chip is part of a Snapdragon Ride platform that Qualcomm says is one of the most advanced, scalable, and open autonomous driving solutions currently available on the market. So guys, first question on this one is this breakthrough from Qualcomm just another small step for self-driving car evangelists, or indeed a giant leap for mankind? What do we think?
I think it's a giant leap amongst many giant leaps, and that's the thing. It's like, actually, if you've got loads of giant leaps, does that just make them all small steps? I don't know. But Qualcomm is right at the forefront of all of this. Obviously, they are publicly positioning themselves as the leader in what is emerging as a fairly hefty scrap between them and other semiconductor type businesses. To snag a piece of what is the fastest growing part of their industry, and that's the automotive sector. They are clearly saying, look, we've got the best solution. We don't just have the hardware, we've got the software as well. We've got all sorts of stuff. It's scalable. We'll be in this for the long term. And if you're an automaker, therefore, we're definitely the people you should talk to, because you work on long product development life cycles, and we'll be there with you throughout the whole thing. They're putting their stake in the ground fairly aggressively right now, but they're not the only ones.
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned there, scale has been a big play from Qualcomm here. Snapdragon Ride supports level 1 basic driver assistance systems right through to level 5 full autonomy, James. Do you think it's likely that this kind of reflects how autonomous technologies are going to be rolled out over the coming years and decades?
Yeah, almost certainly. I think we'll see a sort of incremental release of these products, which will go right from level 1 through to level 5. But I think we are talking
that level 5 and full autonomous driving. I mean, I know that a lot of the companies in this have sort of pitched ideas of 2021, 2022. I think you can add another 10 years onto that quite comfortably. I think that there's a couple of reasons for that. One is public perception. The idea that you can just go from the existing system to fully autonomous driving. It's just not going to happen. The public have to be able to get used to it, and that's why we will see these sort of iterative improvements from level 1 to level 5. In the same way that actually, if you look at how electric vehicles have evolved, you go back, the Prius is far more than a decade old, and it started off with that sort of hybrid car, full electric cars, which are still coming through now. Let's face it, the combustion engine is still by far the most popular car of choice, if you like. So I think we'll see a sort of similar evolution when it comes to autonomous vehicles as we have done with electric.
Yeah. Ron, have you got anything to add on that particular point? Obviously, we know at the moment the idea of a fully autonomous car probably to a lot of drivers seems inconceivable in a way, but do you think once the point comes where these things are actually ready to be fully autonomous, people will be more used to having some degree of autonomy like in their cars? It's an iterative process, as James said.
Yeah, it's an evolution. I think what we will see is, so we've got people like Qualcomm and others. It's not just about processors, obviously. It's about connectivity, latency, edge computing, Ericsson and folks like that are going to be key to that, because they're providing the radios to connect all this stuff together. Where we will see the biggest impact is in an autonomous driving sense or autonomous vehicle sense, isn't really going to be on our roads. I mean, that's going to evolve in a itty-bitty fashion depending in where you live in the world and how advanced your infrastructure is. That's going to take 20 years probably before that becomes kind of standard. What we will see though is on the consumer side, probably taxi type firms, the Ubers of the world, being a bit more aggressive around this. But generally speaking, it's industrial applications where this is going to really make a big impact, and that's you can imagine mines and big industrial complexes where you can have much more control and there's much more predictability around the flow of traffic for whatever kind of vehicle you're talking about. That's much more applicable, and there's a much more clearly direct return on investment for those industries to apply that sooner rather than later. It will kind of broaden out to become a much more consumer thing on the back of that kind of investment, and there's nothing unusual about that. You can go back hundreds of years and find similar industries evolving in the same way, where technology is implemented first to make the operation of a business somewhere more efficient, whether it's a coal mine or a power station or whatever. Only after that do you start to see the consumer side industries, the consumer side infrastructure, I should say, begin to evolve. It's going to be an interesting journey, but the industrial applications are where it's going to really make a difference to start.
Yeah. Obviously, this is the semiconductor companies pivoting towards this industry where they see a lot of potential. James, we know there are other players here, NVIDIA, Intel. Do you see this race intensifying even more?
So, yeah, definitely. I mean, these are companies with a lot of skin in the game. I think Rom said a little bit earlier that it's one of the fastest growing areas of industry, and certainly in terms of mobility, it will probably be the biggest step change that we've ever seen. We know that NVIDIA is going really hard at it. It's already got a tie-up with Toyota, and it's making its sort of pre-trained drive models available for R&D purposes in an open source fashion. It's also working with Didi, which is China's largest ride-hailing platform, so obviously that's an absolutely enormous market there. You've also got Mobileye, which Intel acquired, I think, around about 3 years ago. And just this week at the Consumer Electronics Show, it sort of outlined its ambitions to dominate the market over the next 5 years, and it has existing relationships with the likes of BMW, Cadillac, and VW, which is already using its chips for sort of driver-facing cameras and that sort of thing. So yeah, as I said, we've got some really, really big companies with significant stakes within autonomous driving. Significant amounts of investment have already gone in. But I think that it's such a large market that actually there's probably room for all those companies, and what we will hope as sort of interested observers is they sort of drive each other forwards in terms of innovation and technology integration. So yeah, really exciting market to be involved in and be observing.
Yeah, we'll touch more on the impact it has on the car manufacturers in a sec, but also, Rom, interestingly, Qualcomm recently helped set a new record for 5G speed as well, and obviously all of this ties in, doesn't it? So they're really well placed here.
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, obviously it's kind of a PR stunt, really, and that paints a picture in of itself. Qualcomm are doing lots of PR at the beginning of 2020 because they want to be seen as a leader in this, and I think what they see, the reason they're doing that is because there's a distinct early mover advantage in that for them. If they can get their stuff baked into the automotive industry, which operates typically on quite long product development life cycles, then they get to become an incumbent before anyone else, if you see what I mean. The story that you're referring to is where they've broken the 2 gigabit per second speed barrier in terms of data transfer all over a 5G network, and they've done that in Italy in partnership with TIM. It's a bit of I mean, it's notable and it's an achievement for sure, but it's also more PR than anything else because it's fundamentally enabled by the fact that TIM, the telco in Italy, owns an enormous chunk of the spectrum over there, which means that they can use that full range of stuff to make it happen. And typically that's not going to be easy anywhere else, where things are more carved up in across more people. But still, that's them saying, it's not just about the chip; it's about how you get things to and from the chip, and then you can start to figure out what you can do with that. So these announcements, I'm sure, will continue, not just from Qualcomm this year. Yeah,
there's a lot of very busy PR people, I'm sure, around at the moment. What we know for sure, though, is that this is an industry that is being flipped on its head, isn't it? And this is an example where technology companies are driving transformation rather than the traditional manufacturers who have, over the history of the automotive industry, been the ones who have kept that innovation kind of in-house. James, what are your thoughts on that kind of dynamic between these huge manufacturers like Daimler or Volkswagen, who are suddenly having huge technology companies come in and forcing them to change the way they work and
it must be these are organisations which have had their own way with things for many decades. It must be quite a daunting and I don't know if worrisome is the right word, but it's certainly a challenging time for these guys. I mean, we are seeing tie-ups now with companies which years ago just would never, they wouldn't have played in the same wheelhouse. It just wouldn't have existed, right? But I think when it comes to the sort of we live in a world which is more connected than everything. Everything will be connected. The Internet of Things, the Internet of Things means that. So these companies are having to work together. So I think that we have to recognise that with technologies like this, no company has the expertise or skills. Not even companies with Apple or Amazon, who seem to have unlimited resource. They're not going to have all the expertise to do this in-house. So I think more and more we are going to see some of the sort of old style companies like car manufacturers having to team up with whether it's chip manufacturers or sort of bleeding edge technology companies. More and more we're going to see the meeting of those worlds, I think, and not just in the automotive industry either.
Yeah, M&A activity is going to be quite interesting over the early part of the new decade, actually, where you're going to see consolidation around all of this stuff as it starts to become more mainstream and widespread, and how that ends up defining what automakers ultimately become will be really interesting to watch. They'll be defined perhaps in a large part by the acquisitions they make.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff, this, isn't it? But now it's time for us to turn off this particular highway, change course, and follow the signposts to Spark 44 with our case study review after this.
Find us as Digital Bulletin on LinkedIn, Facebook and Instagram, and at Digi_Bulletin on Twitter.
For this month's case study deep dive, we're going to take a look at our project with Spark 44, published at the end of last year. A creative agency that has achieved a lot in a short space of time, only launched in 2011, Spark 44 delivers creative communications and large-scale marketing campaigns for brands familiar to us all, and technology is one of its main drivers. Before we discuss our experiences from this one, let's hear from Ahmed Hassan, the company's global head of experience, as he reveals the 2 key areas where digital can make an impact on his industry.
Digital in the advertising marketing arena is, to even talk about it is almost an error and a mistake and an eye in some ways. We're all digital. We all surf for everything we're looking for. So that's a given. But the answer kind of has 2 parts. There's playing with technology, and I mean playing with technologies and testing and learning and pushing the boundaries from a point of view of delivering better communications. So having access to various tools and systems is critical to help people really stretch and ride that bleeding edge kind of curve. But on the other side, the critical part is really having platforms and systems in place that allows for continuity of brand image, continuity of messaging, consistency in what we're communicating globally, and that kind of technology really is quite critical to ensure that that what gets created and shared is done so equally effectively and in a conformant way.
So James, as Ahmed said there, obviously this is a creative agency, it's a marketing company, but obviously technology clearly still underpins both innovation and delivery at Spark 44. Did you sense that that technology was a crucial element to its success?
Yeah, definitely. It's sort of been a key component of its growth. I mean, just to put it in some sort of context, Spark 44 is about 8 years old, and it's gone from when it was founded to now being a company with I think around about 1,000 employees, something like 19 offices around the world. So a properly big organisation now. And when we spoke to Ahmed, and we also spoke to Ali McManus, who I think we'll be hearing from in a little bit as well, a real key part of when they were growing, a real key thing for them was that the different employees there could still speak to each other really easily. I think Ali said that it was important that you could have a conversation with someone who was 3,000 miles away in the same way that you could, sort of lean over the table and chat to your mate, and to do that, obviously they needed technology that could enable that. But at the same point as well, the way it's been set up is that you've got teams in various continents working on the same projects, and they have to be able to dip in and out of that content. They have to be able to look at where their storyboards are, where their edits are, almost in real time actually. So the technology to enable that has been hugely important in sort of allowing that growth and allowing that sort of joined up collaborative feel over loads of different time zones and continents.
Yeah. Rom, do you want to talk a little bit about Spark 44 and what they do? Because their setup and their story is quite unique, isn't it?
Yeah, so a lot of this is the reason why technology has been so important to them is rooted in their origin story, if you like. So Spark 44 was created through a need that Jaguar Land Rover had. And Jaguar Land Rover is not their only client, but it was in the beginning. A bunch of pretty high-profile people were operating on the inside of Jaguar Land Rover to try and figure out how they could rationalise what Jaguar was doing from a marketing point of view. At that time, 8 years ago, Jaguar wasn't doing very well. Fundamentally, its sales were dropping, and they needed to inject new life into the whole brand. And kind of unusually, they decided to go in-house. They said, look, we've got multiple different agencies doing multiple different things. Anybody that's listening to this who's part of a large organisation will be familiar with what that is like. There are lots of overheads involved in that. There's, when you've got multiple parties working on different things, you end up spending more time just trying to manage that than actually achieving anything. Jaguar said, look, let's create a joint venture, and that's what is kind of special and different about Spark and why we were interested in it. That means that it's kind of part owned by, ultimately, Tata, which owns Jaguar, and part owned by the people that set up Spark 44 as an agency. they set out to be very single-minded in terms of what they wanted to achieve for Jaguar, and I think, without going into the details, they definitely did that, due not least to the effectiveness of their marketing. Now, not only is that an interesting structure for an agency, it also enabled them to structure themselves differently, and that's where the technology comes in. They said, look, we're going to have a global operation, because Jaguar is a global thing. Hence, we're going to need 19 offices, and we're going to need a lot of people doing things locally. But we're going to have one P&L. We're going to have one set of objectives. Essentially, it's one team. How do we do that globally? That's the challenge. And the answer to that was to deploy things like, especially, a platform from Senshare. And Senshare is a German provider of digital asset management, content management systems, etc., which enabled them to operate across a single, I think Ahmed called it a single source of truth, but basically it's a pot in which everybody is putting their stuff and taking it out. As you'll know, anybody who's done anything around advertising and marketing knows that the development of those resources and assets is a furiously fast-moving and complicated process. You're iterating things constantly. You're working in multiple different languages. You need to localize and do. It's loads of stuff is changing all the time. And so stringing that all together amongst 1,000 people in 19 different locations requires some pretty clever technology. And that's what Senshare in particular, not just Senshare, but that's what they provide. And so it was really interesting to go in there and talk to them about how they were successfully able to pull that off.
Yeah, and they've lifted that obviously to other clients aside from Jaguar Land Rover now, including Tetley's tea. Are they still doing that?
Tetley, yeah. So it's a massive tea brand. Obviously, Tetley is what we call it in this country. It's called other things elsewhere. Yeah.
But good English tea.
Yes.
So obviously, technology, as we've discussed there, is a sort of a crucial backbone to the global operation that is Spark 44. But now, I think we've hinted at it already. They're also big on company culture, and I think when you have a creative workforce, culture is a very important thing. Global HR Director Ali McManus revealed to us that employees are expected to be, quotes, brave, bold and honest. Now, this is a credo that runs to the very foundations of Spark 44. And here is McManus discussing the balance between digital aptitude and creating the best environment for its creative workforce to flourish.
I think we need to maintain the focus that we have on digital capability because it's an ever-changing landscape and an ever-changing marketplace. But I think it's important that we don't only go externally and recruit those individuals, that we maintain the focus on internally developing that knowledge and capability with our existing staff. But I feel that it's important that we also don't forget the importance and value of the partnership between digital and also the human mind and human talent. We employ people who want to think differently, who are willing to challenge, who will fight for what is right, and really want to do the best work for the client. And I think the digital capability is intrinsic to our success, but so is making sure that we maintain those human skills and that human element. That's really, really important to us.
James, we know culture was an overarching theme to the Spark 44 story. How strongly did that message come through to you when you were there?
Yeah, I mean, apart from the fact brave, bold and honest was sort of emblazoned on every sort of spare bit of the office, it was pretty much everywhere. But I do, there is always a temptation maybe to sometimes be a bit snarky about stuff like that. But I think what came through was it is sort of baked into the company. They were principles which were sort of laid out by the founding fathers of the company 8 years ago. This isn't something that's new to them, and it seems to have stood the test of time. It's still there now, right? So, I think what it was about was, I think, as Ali said there, about sort of making sure that their employees, they feel they're able to be brave, they're able to come forward with ideas. And not necessarily, just because they're high up within the company. I think they try and encourage people from whether they're the most junior staff or directors to come forward with their ideas and try and be creative, and try and be really bold with those creative ideas as well. It seemed like the sort of yardstick that everyone was sort of judged against within the company, and that went from Ahmed and Ali, right? As I said, right down to
the most junior of employees. So yeah, it was interesting when I walked in and saw it sort of plastered everywhere. Like I said, it's easy to be a bit snarky, but actually I came out of there and I truly believe that was something that they sort of live by every day.
It also has a sort of number of rewards programs in place as well, doesn't it, for its employees? Now, do you think, we know in technology especially that talent retention, talent attraction is a very big challenge. Do you think types of initiatives like that help with bringing in the best people?
Well, yeah, like you said, whether it's the creative industry and as with technology, the agencies are battling for the best talent, right? Because they want the best campaigns, they want to retain clients, they want to attract new clients. So I think anything like that is going to help. I think that companies are aware now that they're having to offer more than just a good salary and a safe job. The employees now, when people talk about millennials, or whether it's Generation X or Z or millennials, they want real job satisfaction. They want to be challenged. They want to work for companies whose ethics and ethos and things like that actually match up with theirs. So yeah, I think companies are having to think more and more outside the box about actually what they can offer their employees, as well as just well, here's your job and here's your salary, and those were certainly part of that. Yeah,
it's really interesting, isn't it? Obviously. It's well known how difficult it is for creative organisations, like organisations who work in areas like marketing, for them to scale. And actually Spark 44 have grown incredibly quickly in such a short space of time. And it's good to hear how technology and people have sort of powered that transformation. We must move on, but if you want to learn more about Spark 44 and the work it's doing, the article and videos are available on digitalbullet.in. But next, data literacy.
Power up your day with the Bulletin Brief, the latest news, insights and opinion delivered straight to your inbox. Subscribe now at digitalbullet.in.
I think we all agree that data literacy is one of the most relevant topics in enterprise today, with many organisations still struggling to translate its truckloads of data into something communicable and effective. Andy Cotgreave, currently Tableau's Technical Evangelism Director, but previously a data analyst at Oxford University, is passionate about the power of visual analysis, but challenges are aplenty in this field. We asked Cotgreave about solutions, and he believes wholesale changes must be made around data literacy and our education systems.
What we need is an understanding at that foundational level of what an effective way to communicate and analyse data is. And it's not 3D exploded pie charts with lots of fancy fonts around it. So we need to change the education at that level. Now, the Royal Society has looked at the curriculum and assessed the UK curriculum, and it's not really very good. So I would want to see a drive to re-educate or educate kids right at that foundational level, because what we find is every year there's a new cohort of graduates coming out of school and out of university, and they've not been taught these fundamental skills. So organisations are wasting thousands and millions of pounds and euros and dollars training people up into what is essentially common sense and can be taught at an early time. We also have an opportunity to, we can at least change this at university, right? Academia is a great place to learn, obviously. Tableau, we have an academic program. Over 1 million students have registered for that and have got access to tools where they can play with data within the university. That's been a really successful program for us. And again, it doesn't matter if you're in science or art, data is everywhere and it will be in your job.
So everybody will need to be data literate. That's what Cotgreave is saying there, Rom. Was data literacy on the agenda when you were at school?
No. I mean, obviously I'm a little bit older than everyone else. I mean, maths was barely on the agenda for me. I remember having, there was a paucity of quality in my own personal education around some pretty basic stuff, let alone data literacy and all the things that might come along with that. So I've now got kids that are going through the school system, and I don't see much happening in that sense.
Do you think it should be happening? Do you agree with Andy Cotgreave when he says that this is essential? These are essential skills.
Yeah, absolutely, and the earlier the better. So these we're not talking about revolutionary kind of high concepts here from a mathematical point of view. That we're not saying that you need to change wholesale what it is you're actually teaching kids to look at and understand. It's basically some essential basic principles that the earlier that you embed that in the curriculum, the better they're going to be able to carry that forward and contribute meaningfully in the workplace ultimately. Personally, and this is completely anecdotal, obviously, I just see it from my own perspective. There's none of that really happening as far as I'm aware yet. So he's absolutely spot on that needs to change.
There was a study recently where only a third of employees in the US said they were confident in their own data literacy skills, and this is people of working age, so obviously that's concerning. But as we've said there, Cotgreave said the skills should be quite easy to actually learn themselves. James, why do you think there is that gap, and why has it been proven so hard to kind of visualize and communicate data? Why is there still this sort of hurdle here?
The quick answer is I don't know. I can take a guess certainly. I mean I think confidence is a big one. I recently spoke to somebody at CompTIA, which sort of does certifications and courses in quite closely aligned with this, both in the United States and the UK, right? And there's no doubt that there's a perception around data and wider IT skills, I think. And there's a perception that you have to be, really clued in with maths or a science genius or something like that, and have a PhD in computer science. But actually, maybe at the very, very highest levels, like if you want to be Anthony Scriffignano, the next one of him, yeah, maybe. But underneath that, when we're talking about some of the basic skills that you need, and to be able to sort of glean useful insights from those, actually there are courses out there which anybody can go and do. And I don't think either, whether in academia, and that's whether it's preschools or university, I don't think that at any level actually the skills that are needed in the workplace for these jobs is being taught. Actually, I certainly think that's true in this country, and if the States is anything like that, then it will be true there. I think that people really need to get a clue, quite frankly, and teach, whether it's children or people on degree courses, skills that are actually relevant in the wider world.
Yeah, you hear no end about the skills gap in data science, for example, and how we don't have enough data scientists. But actually, I've heard arguments where people in industry have said, actually, we don't need a proliferation of data scientists. We need a proliferation of employees who are skilled in using data at a basic level. That will then help data become a more embedded part of an organisation's sort of culture. I mean, that kind of makes sense, that argument, doesn't it? It isn't all about people, of course. Businesses are now fortunate enough to have access to tools that perform many data-related tasks for them. Cotgreave's own career in data began by him simply aggregating information from Microsoft Excel for his boss. Now he's heavily involved in the implementation of complex solutions for data management and visualization at Tableau. For him, being able to utilize data in real time is one of the most transformative changes brought about by such technology.
That's one of the key things for me, because so ingrained in the history of business intelligence is this: we are going to build a chart or a dashboard, and there you go, we've done our data visualization project. There's the dashboard. It's a monolith that stands on the browser and it never changes, right? And you're like, well, hang on, that dashboard is thus only answering the questions that we told it to answer 6 months ago, 12 months ago, right? Whereas that's not how businesses work. I've got new questions today that I didn't have last week, and things change all this time, right? So having the tools that are available that enable this iteration, this exploration, answering questions you didn't anticipate, is just, I've seen it in my own work prior to joining Tableau, and I've seen thousands of customers discover how, well, if you have tools that can respond very quickly to questions as they arise, it's just completely transformative for organizations.
Now, Tableau is a $1 billion company, so they're obviously having a lot of success in this particular area. Do you think what Cotgreave is talking about there, Rom, these types of technologies where you're able to see data in real time and make decisions off the back of it, that's kind of where everybody wants to get to, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that is data literacy in a way, which is to say, what are the tools and the systems that we have as a company that enables our workforce to access the data in the first place? Because you can't be literate if you don't have it. And I guess you could call it the democratization of data, where you are developing systems that enable people to make much more granular decisions constantly on a real-time basis based on the data available to you, right? And that's true whether in any industry that you're working in.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, that's it, folks. Before we go, issue 13 of the Digital Bulletin magazine will be out at the end of January. And when it comes to podcasts, we have a goldmine of buzzword-busting fragmented reality episodes, including interviews with top people from the likes of Rackspace, VMware, and Cognizant. And Ahmed Hassan, actually, from Spark 44, which has just been released. You can get in touch with us at podcast@digitalbullet.in. But lastly, thank you, James.
Thank you very much. Been a pleasure.
Thank you, Romilly.
No problem.
And we will speak to you again soon, listener. Thank you for joining us.
That was the Digital Bulletin podcast, brought to you by Bulletin Media. Listen and subscribe to a range of podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts and Stitcher. Plug into digitalbullet.in for news, features and case studies on the very latest in enterprise technology and digital transformation.